6:30, we'll go ahead and get started here. So just really quickly, my name is Matthew Grimes. I'm a reader here at the Judge Business School, one of the academic co-directors at the Entrepreneurship Center. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight for another exciting Enterprise Tuesday. We like to think of Enterprise Tuesday as kind of our front door to the world that is the Entrepreneurship Center. So if you're interested in other offerings that we have, do come and talk to us afterwards. Visit the website, pick up a pamphlet. This evening we're going to be talking about disruption and scale, both of which, big ideas. You get to hear about both in one night. So we brought in our heavy hitters, Dr. Hitesh Sanjani. So Dr. Hitesh, I'm not going to steal Hitesh's thunder because I'm going to introduce Hitesh and Hitesh is going to introduce Darrin. Dr. Hitesh is the Senior Director at AstraZeneca in charge of emerging innovations, where he manages the open innovation process. For those of you unfamiliar with open innovation, it's this exciting trend within large organizations to kind of open up the boundaries of their organization and begin to connect in with universities and other entrepreneurs to sort of provoke the innovation process in these large organizations. So Hitesh, I'll turn it over to you for a second.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm here just to introduce Darrin, and I've read his bio, and I feel wholly inadequate. So, but I'm going to go through it. But just a bit of background to me, as mentioned, we support the Entrepreneurship Center at the Judge Business School, and we're helping on the Accelerate program, trying to kind of produce entrepreneurs and build the ecosystem that is in Cambridge. One entrepreneur that has done this without any help from anybody, or from at least from AstraZeneca, is Darrin, and so I'm going to introduce him to you. And I guess what I've learned is that, as I said, he has achieved so much, and a serial entrepreneur. And he's listed only 3 enterprises on his bio, but actually I've just learned that he's involved in starting 13 companies. So the idea of only should take an entrepreneur at the second one, and then they usually fail at the third and the fourth is completely wrong in Darrin. And then he's also invested in 40 startups. But the 3 companies that he's involved in particularly is Mogrify, which is, we saw a recent presentation at AstraZeneca on this, around cell conversion technology, and looks really exciting. He's also chairman of Selixia, which is a regenerative medicine company, going into phase 2B soon, and I'm hoping we'll hear about that, I'm sure, in the future. But I guess his first love, maybe, and CEO, co-founder of Horizon Discovery. He led that started off with a 200K funding seed round, which I'm hearing a lot of the entrepreneurs, when I look on the Accelerate program, they get this 200K, but he's been successful up to building a company that at the market cap was about 500 million a few years ago. But not just starting companies, I think. He wants to give back, and that's what I think is really interesting. He's been involved in a lot of mentoring programs, in particular here. He's involved in education as well, trying to build new entrepreneurs, and he's actually backed a lot of different companies, which I mentioned earlier, around the 40 startups through the Professor Chris Lowe, who you may know, the Carpe Diem Enterprise Fund. So really cool. And he's a chemist like me, so that's good sign. But I've also learned around biotechnology with, I think, Chris Lowe when he was here. And I think the most interesting thing, and I guess really showing 2 sides of his capabilities, is one, obviously, his career and him given an OBE very recently, and I guess one of only 3 people to have achieved both, which is also a Lifetime Achievements Award for Enterprise and Promotion, which I think is a rare event. So with that, I hand over to Darrin to make us feel wholly inadequate.
Hi there. Thank you. Okay, so I can only possibly fail after that. Thanks, Hitesh. So this is a new talk. I haven't given this one before, so I was actually quite pleased to not have to deliver a retread motivational talk. So I've actually come up with this new one. So what we're going to talk about today is how you disrupt, not just at the beginning of a company to get a business going, but how you create the right sort of business environment to create scalable disruption, where you're actually going to build the longevity in your business, built from whether it be the fundamental scientific underpinnings, or whether it be continuous product innovation, or whether it be through disrupting markets and your larger competitors, if you work in a startup world where you're up against much bigger companies, you can't compete with them by following the same strategies and adopting the same tactics. How you can use business innovation to sort of shape the future of your company. And the key here is the scalable disruption. If I was looking at my sort of 30 years here in Cambridge and seeing ideas that have truly changed the world, solid state single analysis sequencing from Solexa, which now underpins Illumina next-gen sequencing, 4 billion of revenue, but Solexa was sold for 670 million long before there was revenue into the business, whether it be phage display, which now underpins most of therapeutic monoclonal antibody production. CAT was sold for 800 million, and whilst it's very well known here, if you go to the United States, no one will have heard of it. They'll have heard of MedImmune, and AstraZeneca bought MedImmune. Well, in reality, CAT, if it had grown right, should have been buying AstraZeneca eventually, in terms of the value of the therapeutics that are producing over 90 billion of revenues from the CAT platform. How do you take great innovation, disrupt markets initially to get your position in the market, and how do you continue to scale against people who typically have more resources than you, big pharmaceutical companies most often in my sector, and how do you win against those companies? So that's what we're going to cover. I always start with this slide, because by definition, when you get people like me here, and you get Hitesh introducing me with all of those sort of plaudits, you know, by definition, there's a selection bias. I'm one of the ones who's survived. You know, out of my 13 businesses, 2 failed, 2 of the first 3, but it didn't destroy me. I didn't go bankrupt. I'd learned a lot, and I was in a position to be able to have a go again. And I think sometimes they should actually invite the people who don't make it back and actually get them to go through their sort of stories. So listen to what I have to say, listen to what everyone has to say, take it in, don't follow anyone. Find your own path. So I want to get everyone on the same page. As someone who doesn't have a business degree, I've worked a lot with people who do, and I think there are some common themes academically and practically. You know, business to me is quite simple. You know, you start with a vision. You know, there's a problem somewhere. A group of people aren't being treated fairly. They're paying too much. They're not getting the clinical outcomes they deserve. This doesn't make sense why things work this way within an entire economy, for example, local, regional, national, or global. And you feel that you can do something to disrupt that, whether it be fundamentally at the scientific level, where you're looking to change a whole sort of macro economy, if you like, within, say, the pharmaceutical industry, whether it be a product that can fundamentally change the way people experience the world, or whether it be an idea that would just make it easier for a relatively small number of people around there. But there's usually a reason why people start businesses, and they start with this is the mountain that we're going to climb. But then you've got to think about, well, how do you get up the mountain? Having mentored so many young businesses and worked with a lot of the young entrepreneurship societies here in Cambridge, the temptation is just to charge up the mountain. There we go, right? And blindly charge up the mountain. But you've got to have a strategy and a set of tactics that's going to enable you to give you the best chance of getting up to that mountain. So the classic questions are, where are we going to play? There are many places we might be able to play, but where are we going to play? Right? And how do we win against the other competitors that are in the market, or the market forces that are against us? If we've often in Cambridge got technologies that are ahead of the market, how are we going to win, for example, if the market isn't quite here yet? And then, probably the most controversial, because it involves people a lot, is how do we organize ourselves to win? How do we best give ourselves a chance? Is it the 3 musketeers? We've only known each other a month, and yet we're all going to be founders with a 3rd equity in the business, not knowing whether in the future we're actually even going to be friends a year down the line. You know, these are difficult decisions, right? How are we going to organize ourselves to try and get up to that summit? Now, here's the bit that everyone who's a young entrepreneur is going to hate me for, right? Is mere mentioning of the word governance. To me, this has been the difference in my career. I've learned to really appreciate that you can't just charge up that mountain. You've got to have that vision. You've got to understand where you play, how you win, how you organize ourselves to win. But you've got to understand all the different risks and rewards associated with going up to the peak of that mountain in the different ways. This is your business plan. You know, how do we understand those risks and rewards of the journeys? How do we measure ourselves? What are the key performance indicators that are going to tell us that we're on the right path? Or if we're not on the right path, how we can correct that path? This is the bit that's fundamental. How are we going to communicate how we're doing? To internal stakeholders, your fellow management team, to employees, to external stakeholders, investors particularly, because you need to be able to communicate progress, because if progress isn't good, you're going to have to come to the last bit. How are we going to be able to affect a decision that's necessary to change either the fundamental mission of the business, the strategy, or the execution? And I'm going to keep coming back to this thing about alignments. Businesses don't tend to fail because of markets. They don't tend to fail because of technology, or they can. People tend to be able to adapt things to maybe have a smaller business plan at the end of the day, but they tend to find a way. But they tend to fail because of people and people's inability to align, or leaders' inability to align a group of stakeholders to a common purpose for a significant period of time. If you're going to scale a business over 10, 12, 15, 20 years, which is what it's going to be need to be able to build a scaled business, you can have all sorts of different stakeholders during that time. And if you can't align them, whether it be in terms of the capital you bring into the business, whether it be the culture that you create, etc., the reward mechanisms for people, exiting different people along the way so people get returns along the way, it's going to be very difficult to build a business that scales for any meaningful time. Hence why many businesses sell quite early, because it gets all too difficult. So leadership is the final one. I see lots of businesses get into difficulty, and the first thing the young CEOs do is blame everyone else. The investors screwed me, signed the wrong terms, etc. Rather than thinking that actually, if you've got the right technology positioned in a market, you've got a good plan, you understand the risk rewards, and you've aligned a group of stakeholders to a common purpose, the rest is about you, and it is in your control. So the first thing you need to do as founders, because this is where the mistakes start, have an honest discussion about motives. If you want to cure cancer and I want to make $10 million, we need to talk about it and come up with a plan that's going to align those two motives. And it's not dirty to want to make money, and it's not unnoble if you're going to use that money to do other good things. So how do we create that plan, funding, and exit strategy that adopts to evolving motives? Because those motives won't be the same as you go through the business. And it's important as a leader that you're constantly having empathy for people's changing positions and understanding those positions and bringing people along for the journey. It's not an autocracy around there. You've got to cascade the mission, strategy, execution, and the governance through the company. So everyone knows when they come into work, why they're coming to work, what's important for them, for the company, maybe their family. So what does success look like, and how are we going to measure success? Because if you get a group of people aligned to a common purpose who come in every day knowing those things, they'll go home more often than not knowing whether they're feeling successful or not, or how to correct that. And that's how you create this sort of dynamic sort of culture within a business. And how do we create the broader business environment that's going to be conducive to this scalable, disruptive innovation? I put a couple of quotes there, right? I spend about 2 days a week in Mogrify, and people are like, well, why are you not in the business? Right? My job is to create other leaders. So I've recruited a team who are more than capable of running that business. What I'm able to do is then facilitate their successful running of that business by using my experience in certain areas to be able to help them achieve things. So leadership is not about creating a load of followers, it's about creating more leaders so they can be successful in your absence. So coming to the way I look at innovation, disruptive innovation, what is it? It either creates a new market by identifying an unmet need. That market could drive widespread change. It could be quite local, domestically. It could be more broadly, environmentally, industrially, or it'd be quite macro at a societal level. I look at things in three ways. Disruptive innovations can be transactional. They drive changes in purchasing behaviours within an existing market. So if you look, for example, now, all the car companies do configurable cars. That's not a personalised model. It's a business tactic in which they can drive the sale of more cars to increasing numbers of individuals around there. It changes the transactional behaviours of the way someone purchases a product. Experiential. For something to be truly, for example, personalised, it has to be experiential. You can create a new human experience. An example here might be autonomous cars. It may create an expanded market or an entirely fundamentally new market. An area in life science that we often affect is the more the macro X environment, if you like, where it impacts the sort of global performance structure and behaviour of an entire market. And I would use personalised medicine as an example of that, because you've got the supply side, precision medicines, getting medicines to patients based on their genetic features, so you're getting things to people very specifically at a fixed point in time around there, but the customer, whilst getting a benefit clinically from a better medicine, and the pharmaceutical company gets reduced costs, gets a better reimbursement strategy, the patient doesn't interact with that experience. For something to be truly personalized, the buy side, the patient has to change the way they interact with medicine. And that involves education, early health and wellness monitoring, diagnosis, etc. But personalized medicine as a whole is an example of something that could drive a macro change in healthcare economics. I'm going to give you a few case studies. I've actually picked 3 of these because I think it would take too long otherwise. I'm going to give you some short snapshots of Horizon. And I've used the word pioneer here. These are companies who have pioneered new ways that weren't necessarily seen at the beginning as going to be really important. So a pioneer in gene editing and gene modulation, which enabled the understanding of the genetic basis of disease and the development of precision medicines targeted to those drivers. Geospot. This is a young startup here in Cambridge. 7 years now it's been going. I'd say it's been pioneering extreme scale spatial data handling, enabling the Internet of everything, anything that's connected and constantly moving in space and time, curating all of that data and being able to search and query it at Google-like speeds, so very complex data, to enable fundamentally new applications in society. Selixir, founded by Cambridge Nobel laureate Sir Martin Evans, that I chair, a pioneer in human tissue engineering, creating allogeneic therapies that are targeting cardiac tissue and regenerating cardiac tissue for patients with heart failure and heart attack. And Mogrify, I think the new company I'm involved with, which I think is a pioneer in what I consider to be potentially a holy grail technology, a universal cell reprogramming technology that can look at conversion of any cell to any other cell without going through a stem cell or progenitor cell state, that potentially opens new types of therapies, even in vivo reprogramming therapies, where you inject a cocktail of small molecules into the site of disease and reprogram the damaged cell tissue into healthy tissue in situ. So, apologies for nicking quite a few current Mogrify slides, but I thought it would be a good example. It's certainly a slide I would have used in many companies. The 4 things that I think are essential to create an environment for disruptive innovation are culture, talent, process, and mindset. So culture is really important. Culture is not something you stick up on a board and get employees to recite the 7 sort of mandates of the company that this is our culture. It's something that you build from the bottom up, link to the top down, and you create an environment that people can believe in when they come to work. So in the case of Mogrify, we look at commercially driven disruption. World-class science, but we must be commercially successful. And if we're commercially successful, we then earn the right to have an impact on the issues we care about, in this case, patients. And it's really important there, because often the world-class science might come, the patient impact might come, but the link to earn the right is not there. So we are commercial in everything we do, even though we're focused on generating cures for diseases. Nothing is impossible. I hate the word impossible. You know, at different points within companies I've been involved with, people would say, that's impossible. I don't believe that. People I really respect, modeling cancer genetics and stuff, that's really esoteric. You hear all of these kinds of words around there. Impossible is the context of the time. The context of the time for a company like Horizon was selector sequencing hadn't yet kicked in. It was still $10 million to sequence one genome rather than the $500 that it currently is. So if there are no questions coming out of DNA sequencing, why do we need to answer them with gene editing and gene modulation? As a business person, by knowing that this was likely to change, that got us into a very good position to leverage into a fantastic opportunity around there. But impossibility shouldn't exist unless you're breaking laws of physics, that you can quantify that you're breaking them. So we look at nothing being impossible. You must remove fear. In life, I give other talks on mindsets and motivations. People talk about their aspirations, but they're defined by their fears. And if you create an environment where people are fearful of putting forward ideas around there, you'll create an environment where people believe things are impossible. They'll also measure success on a relative basis rather than an absolute basis. So just better than the next neighbor will be good enough around there. So you want to create an environment where you empower individuals free of fear, and by thinking big, they can deliver what's impossible. This next one is very controversial. I tried to introduce this one into a company I was at, probably the one I spent most time at, and people weren't having it. You know, in Mogrify we have it, great, not good. Would you ever replace a good person who's doing a very competent job to hire a great person? if they came along. And you'll know this from the old days of pharmaceutical in companies, right? The projects that just keep going. They get legs and they go and they go and they go, and the objective is to just get it funded again, whether it be internally or in the case of a company by venture capitalists putting more money in. Everything has an opportunity cost. So you need to create an environment where people see that around there. And if they've got no fear to bring their ideas of projects forward, they also need to accept that those projects don't have a divine right to continue, even if they're doing well. Because markets change, new opportunities arise. It may be better to kill a project that's doing well to start a new project that actually has a much better chance of success. Right? So try and create equal opportunity, reward hard work and adaptability, but judge everything versus the highest standards. The next one is one that's very personal to me. I don't look at success as a series of destinations to be reached. It's a journey to be undertaken around there. You don't measure success on a relative basis, you measure it on an absolute basis. And I believe, following the same through to the company, I believe that success in a company is shared by a group of aligned individuals who respect and, very importantly, enjoy working with each other. Okay. And then you've got to have a motive at the end that's beyond yourself and beyond the company around there. And for us, it's about making a difference to people. When I talk about the commercial success and the impact, at Horizon, for me, the impact was patience, but it was actually also education, entrepreneurship. You know, Horizon was a great supporter of the local community around there, and we were able to do that because we were commercially successful. If I'd have been throwing the money away I was as CEO, sponsoring everything and doing all of these things with young entrepreneurs, if we weren't doing very well, no one would have allowed us to do that. So have a clear culture. To me, that's the culture that you should be trying to create. It'll be tailored a little bit based on your company. That's the Mogrify culture, but I think it's important most have an essence of this within them. Talent. People are everything in the business. They're everything that's often good about the business, they're often everything that's bad about the business as well. Most of your problems that arise in business will be to do with people, so make sure you hire good people to start with. So understand who you're hiring and why you're hiring them. You understand the roles and responsibilities very clearly. You're often in a rush when you're starting a company and you hire any warm body you can sort of find and you bring them in. Don't do that. Take your time. Hire your first tier and make sure that they're all people who are highly responsible, functional individuals who can align behind a common purpose. And if you get that sort of spine correct, you will make mistakes as you hire other people underneath them, but those mistakes won't necessarily be really critical to any function within the business. So make sure you pay well. Who in this room is middle of the road? Put your hand up if you're middle of the road.
What does that mean?
Median. Are you middle of the road? Middle of the road ability. No one likes to think of themselves as middle of the road ability, do they? So why do you want to be benchmarked to the median of the industry? I remember I got benchmarked to the median, having just done the biggest IPO in the history of Cambridge Life Science, one of the biggest ever in the UK. I was benchmarked to the median, the middle of the road around there. And you don't want that, right? I don't want people leaving the Mogrify building so they can walk down the road to Hitesh, who will pay them 15% more and a better benefits package. So we're paying upper quartile around there. We make sure we have a benefits package that can put any top company to shame. Health, dental, higher pension, income protection, share saving schemes, progressive holiday. If you're asking people to be more productive, if they're being productive beyond that, well, what is 240th, which is your working allocation every year that they work for you? They get another day's vacation to a cap. You know, people there. So create progressive environment and make sure that people don't leave your business just for the sake of a couple of £1,000, especially when you're in this sort of high growth environment. Make sure you hire people wherever they come from. Not convenient. Hire people from all over the world. Your business needs to be world class, not just good local people. Create an innovative and entrepreneurial culture. When I mean entrepreneurial, I don't mean everyone running around taking sort of ragged risks. It's an environment where people don't have fear. They're prepared to take risks, but they've got to understand that risk and then get people to buy in to how they're going to manage that risk. And then the company is prepared to sort of back people and their ideas. And mentoring. Me and Hitesh did a whole panel with AstraZeneca. If I hear another person, you know, if I'm good at anything in life, it's raising money and mentoring. Because I understand what it is around there. It is not about making people better at their job. It's making them have so much, see their growth potential, put them on a growth path that takes them way beyond where your business is. They should make your business have to be much better in order to be able to keep them around there. It's a selfless task, mentoring. It's not a selfish task about making your company better. By default, it will make your company better around there, but that's not the end point. Okay. Great facilities. Who wants to work in a dump around there, right? I remember when Horizon started, we were in the pig shed at the Babraham. I refused to go there. And we got them out there over a weekend. Novartis were coming to, we had 3 people. Novartis were coming to do potentially a very large project with us, which we had no capability to deliver. So naturally, we moved everyone to this fancy building in the Cambridge Research Park and pretended it was full and all the rest of it like that. Around that. Create an environment where people want to work, yeah? Logistic, make sure it's in a hub. You know, Cambridge is fantastic because it's a great culture, great environment for people there. It can be a competitive environment, so if you get the talent proposition wrong and the desirable traits wrong, you can struggle to keep your talent. But if you get it right, you benefit from being in a great hub. Make sure that people aren't having to travel an hour and a half to work every day. And make sure they're not paying to come to work. I think these are very simple things that people sort of get wrong. And then if you do that, you create an environment where you're able to attract world-class talent, wherever it comes from. So I spend a lot of time on that, but make sure you do that piece right. Okay. Process. No one likes to think of process when they think of innovation. It's like the governance of innovation around there. But process is essential. And we move, you know, we live in an age where if you think way back, you know, you go back to the Middle Ages, the first written document, and then you move into the print, then you move into digital, right? And then eventually you move into computer science. You know, the speed of change was dramatically going. Then genomics came along, and you didn't just have Moore's law, you had exponential sort of growth in data generation. And now with things like GeoSpock and others, you're starting to get almost unitary access to data. So data is not the limiting factor. You're going to get lots of feedback. So your strategies are going to have to be adaptive. Projects, business plans, budgets, you know, are not fixed things that you set for a long time. They're guidances for a period of time, but you have to be prepared to adapt and change them. And the same with innovation. When you get a project funded, that doesn't mean you have the divine right to continue that project forever around there. But what you want to do is create a low barrier to entry, so that culture where people will come forward with ideas around the thing. There'll be themes set top down that you innovate around, and then you'll create some complete blue sky areas where people are free to spend time to think about things that are orthogonal to the business, that could be the future of the business. And you don't want to laugh at anyone for their ideas, right? Encourage them to put them in the funnel, but immediately you have to have some sense of why that's a good project. What is it? Why is it important? How's it going to make a difference for this company? And why should we give you some proof of concept resources in order to be able to take it forward? And so I keep saying students, I get students to do this for businesses. If the employee can't articulate it in a minute, it clearly isn't important enough for them to actually bring forward. So you set a bar that is low for the idea, but then immediately they have to come forward with a very broad business case based on assumptions for that. We need to then agree parameters of success, what the go, no-go points are, and how we're going to monitor it. So that's the strategy, execution, and governance, but at a project level around there. And then we have to continuously evaluate those projects, refine and feed that back into the process. And perhaps the most important thing, particularly when you're a young company with limited resources, you have to be prepared to kill projects at every stage around there. And then have very clear decision-making responsibility for who is going to have input, who is going to recommend the sponsor, who is making the decision about these projects, who's performing it, and who's making the final decisions to kill or refine. So here's one that we've set up for Mogrify. Because of the technology, the first phase of cell conversion for us is actually quite a short phase, and it's quite cheap relatively to normal sort of development times for therapeutic proof of concepts. So we want a lot of ideas coming into the pipeline. So opportunity suggestion is just a one-page summary. You need to have a scientific case, has to have an executive sponsor, and the person has to have gone out and spoke to someone that cell conversion is relevant to in a therapeutic area. And they then come back with that proposal. The ELT can make a quick decision to put some resources into that. It then goes into the validation phase, gets a more detailed analysis. It then goes to a strategic committee that has an internal group that's representative of the different functions of the business. It has members of the scientific advisory board, and it has members of the key opinion leaders from outside who have expertise in cell therapy. And that project at this stage may get 150, 250,000 pounds of resource to work on for about 9 months worth of work. And during that phase, they'll be doing some experimental validation around there, getting to a basic proof of concept on cell conversion and building the case for a product market fit of how this conversion now might become a therapeutic. Everything from your preclinical, CMC regulatory, clinical development paths, etc. Because at that point, you may be committing 1.5 to 2.5 million of resources into that project around there. And then as you go down into one of the few projects that we select to go into development, has to now have effectively its own business plan. Okay. So, mindset. Really good companies, and I'm going to give an example of Horizon Discovery in a minute, and I think it was a really good company in this sense, is your job is to creatively destroy your own success and your own markets around there, not to sit comfy in your position of emerging sort of success in the marketplace. You know, the natural tendency is to retreat behind the success that you have, polish the lathe, if you like, and avoid future change. Companies that are really great, and a lot of the American sort of tech companies have taken this approach, they commit to disrupting their own insurgency. Right? Only with the benefits of scale can you truly have an impact on a macro sort of market, for example. Right? It's got to be well defined. You can't keep the things that nimbleness, etc., that you start with as an entrepreneur. If you want to get to scale, you'll learn eventually as an entrepreneur that your job to get to scale is getting ever less out of ever more people, but within a framework that's going to enable you to truly scale your delivery of your innovation within a marketplace. Okay. They're not wedded to their business model. It wasn't invented here, it's not important. Right? You can learn from everyone. They're only interested in their customers. Businesses only exist because of customers. There's no such thing as a lifestyle business. If you've been on a Friday night and not been able to pay your 20 employees and laying them off on a Monday, trust me, it's not much of a good lifestyle, right? So they focus on their customers. They don't erect defenses against the future. They embrace the notion of limitless horizons. So I'm going to give you 3 slides, 3 case studies, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the companies. So Horizon, 2007 to present. I was there from 2007 to 2018. Around this, I was there for most of the time. It's currently the market leader in gene editing and gene modulation. 500 employees located in the UK and the US, over 10,000 customers in over 50 countries, and this year is forecast to do over $85 million of revenue at profit. Its peak market cap was $560 million. It's off of that at the moment. So, what was the status quo at the time? People had started to be able to express genes and then knock them down with different technologies. With plasmids, the first form of RNA interference, etc. And it enabled people to study the functions of genes. So if they were starting to look at what does this gene do, how might it be associated with a disease. But often that gene expression around there wasn't completely knocked down. If you wanted to add function, whereas knockdown is take away function, you wanted to see what a mutation might do. There was no means of looking at how a mutation might affect endogenous expression of a gene, which might affect a disease outcome. But it did enable functional genomics around there, and lots of things happened here that won Nobel Prizes for Kopecky, Smithies, and Evans using plasmids. Martin Evans, the founder of Selixia, won the Nobel Prize for looking at the knockout mouse, for example, using homologous recombination, gene knockdown. So that was the status quo for a long time, right the way through 2007. The ability came with gene editing to precisely edit the DNA, and with much better RNA interference reagents to more precisely modulate the RNA function. So you could introduce a genetic mutation and see what happens downstream. You could put multiple mutations in, you could knock out genes. So you effectively could start getting to the point where you could model patient genetics in a test tube, in cells, in matched pairs of cells, where you have a healthy cell and the same cell, but just with the putative genetically driving feature, if you like. You could also do the same in a mouse or a rat. So you could create, effectively, patients in a laboratory. And this enabled what we call translational genomics, so much more accurate associations of genetic features with disease onset, progression, drug resistance, etc. That then enabled the development of medicines that were targeted to those genetic drivers, and that led to what we call now precision medicine, or moving towards personalized medicine. Okay. One of the real novelties of what Horizon done is you've been used to buying consumables, and it was a consumable-driven pricing. People focused on their own platforms. So a good example would be Sangamo, who acquired a small company here in Cambridge. It was developed by a friend of mine, Yen Xu, under Aaron Klug, who developed the zinc finger nuclease technology for gene editing. His PhD work effectively got bought for 40 million. I think Cambridge Enterprise were an investor in this company. And Sangamo, another case of American company, took on the technology, and Sangamo became the big company in that field. But they buried the technology within their company. And people were still using the old technology from Kopecky, Smithers, and Evans around there, and they got frustrated with it. So when we came along, we wanted to disrupt that around there. So it was still expensive to do gene editing. Sequencing costs hadn't come down. That was the context of our reality at that time. So what we decided to do was to give our technology away to academics. So our inventory of genetically defined disease models, we gave away over at 100% discount, or at least 95% discount. You couldn't yet make these at high, 20 people were required to make 20 in a year. So it was really expensive. You couldn't be doing projects for academics. You were doing them for pharmaceutical companies. So we created 60 centers of excellence around the world, gave the technology away for free. People were able to use it. And the innovations that came out of that were licensed back, or had an option to license back, to Horizon. Our biggest competitor, with eventually Sangamo licensed the zinc fingers to Sigma-Aldrich, a massive, $4 billion revenue sort of company, now part of Merck Millipore. And Eric Rhodes and Dave Smoller, who subsequently ended up working for Horizon, because we bought that division out of Sigma-Aldrich, were the dominant player in the field. But they were slow moving around there. So we decided to give things away, which they struggled to pivot to, because they'd bought this technology for a lot of money from Sangamo around there. We were very much scientific driven, they were consumable driven. We decided not just to stick to our own technology, RAV, we licensed pretty much every technology in the field. So we wanted to be the curators of all the gene editing technique, the genome surgeons, if you like. So we licensed all of the competitive technologies, and as CRISPR came along, we were the first licensor of all of the CRISPR IP around there. So we wanted to have all the tools in the box to take that away. We wanted to be the best practitioners of those. But the reason for doing that open innovation model was the cost basis and the demand in the market. By the end, Horizon now has 10,000 customers, has 1 million plus products. It's gone from being a bespoke sort of custom service kind of business to a product business selling derivative products into lots of different markets in research, drug discovery, development, diagnostics, for example. So it was a real great example of how you don't value things based on the commodity. It was an asset value. We would license these cells initially for $25,000 per year to Big Pharma. And every year they didn't even get a new tube, they just got an invoice around there. So you had to sell it based on each of these was an asset, if you like. Multi-platform and open innovation. So I think, to me, that was the real success of what Horizon did in the market. And then within the culture, within the business, it created a culture of everyone being aligned to this world-class science commercial success piece. And Horizon, who only reached $560 million market cap, the stakeholders in that business, investors made up to 50x return. The founders didn't participate beyond the 2014 IPO, and they made more money than the CAT, Solexa founders combined in those areas, because they retained a significant value in the business. So there's a lot of things that were innovative about that business beyond the sort of market capitalization that it achieved. So one, I'm looking at this, hard to look at you being the investor in this company, Victor. So this one is a young student business. I backed Cambridge University Entrepreneurs for 7 years and funded that society, and lots of businesses have come out of that. One of my favorites is Geospoc, a young entrepreneur from Salford in Manchester. Couldn't write a business plan to save his life. I saw him last night, he probably still couldn't write a business plan to save his life, but he was incredibly innovative, had a brain the size of a planet, and his PhD work had been studying at how you could use deterministic indexing, sharding, computational analysis across lots of different machines, and using super fast querying algorithms to monitor a second of brain function, billions of nodes, trillions of connections in a second. And the prior art beyond that had been the IBM Gene Solver computer system, which did 1 second in a fortnight Right, so he's a very sort of smart kid. The company right now, to come to the end, is 75 employees, located in UK, US, and Asia. Asia is the real expansion area for this. I've had some recent updates in the last few days. I think we're about to get some very exciting news from that business out in Asia. They've launched now a platform in geospatial big data. Their key focuses are enabling smart cities and connected vehicles. The old market cap is roughly around $50 million, but I think the new market cap is going to be significantly higher in the next 6 to 9 months. So what was the state of the art? And this is a really great example, because if you think about computing, the Moore's law, every 18 months, computer processing power changing every 18 months, then you went into the genomics with the exponential. Data, 90% of all data in history is being generated every 18 months, and Geospoc is now in year 7. So in that period this company has been going, 90% of all the data in history has been generated 3 times over. So when we started this business at the beginning, the state of art, and still is to a certain degree, is MySQL, NoSQL, so relational databases. The key with these relational databases, the limitations, is they only enable 2 of the 3 main parameters that you would want for a extreme scale sort of database system. You can either have scale and response, but with no speed, or you can have small scale, speed, but not dynamically changing. And then if you think of the applications of the future, smart cities, everything is connected to the internet. If you want to drive something like the Singaporean government wants to drive the world's first smart city, where everything at all times is connected to our net, how are you going to handle that with all the real-time applications? So Geospoc came up with a deterministic indexing, multi-dimensional querying engine, and that enables, I've been told it's the next scale up from this now, petabyte scale, but larger than that, dynamic response and real-time speed. So one of the things they've solved in computer science is they've got a handle on complexity theory, which suggests every node of data, if you add another dimension of data, you get a quadratic reduction in efficiency. That effectively is what they've solved through this system. Mostly people were doing on-premise closed solutions, and I know just what we're even looking at these kinds of solutions now, but they're very much now moved into a more open solution, sort of a cloud-based solution. I'm incredibly excited about this business. It took a long time, a lot of pivots with patient investors. I was the first investor with Jonathan Milner, then CIC was the next big investor, and Parkour. People have been very patient with this company, and I think they're going to be paid off over the next couple of years because the market is moving to them very quickly. Third one is Mogrify, and I'll give you more detail on this a bit later. So I started on this in, when was it? February the 20th this year to now. So that's the commercial phase. There was 1 employee at the time, Pierre. We're at 35 employees now, hiring about 20 more, based in UK, US, and Asia. It's a universal cell conversion platform. It's an enabling platform for cell therapy regenerative medicine, and its market cap is around $45 million in its first year. So if you look at state of the art, so Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize in 2013 for the concept of identifying 4 transcription factors, things inside a cell that could drive the conversion of a skin fibroblast cell to an inducible pluripotent stem cell, to an immature state, and that cell could then be reprogrammed or forward differentiated into different tissue types. So the idea was that it could produce a renewable source of stem cells and would enable the use of the stem cell field quite broadly. It also introduced the concept, but never reduced it to practice, of the possibility to reprogram cells directly. Right? The Yamanaka process is an educated trial and error method. It took nearly a decade to identify those 4 factors. But if you're going to do this universally, you have to be able to do this process systematically. Because if you can reprogram cells from any other cells, it removes the need for stem cells, or at least you can use stem cells by choice as a starting cell type. So the approach that the Mogrify platform enables you to do is to give you a de novo approach to cell therapy. So you can start from the same platform and go any direction that you want in regenerative medicine or cell therapy. The historical thing has been bespoke and closed platform, whereas Mogrify is a systematic approach to cell therapy and very much an open platform. And I'm going to get into more detail on this in a moment. Okay. So it's an opportunity for me to practice my pitch on this one. So what is Mogrify? Right? And I'm going to come back to the end about why we think it's so innovative as a platform. It's a universal cell conversion technology. So the concept is that you're able to take any cell of any age of any state of health or disease and reprogram it and convert it to any other cell type of any state of age and disease without following evolutionary biology. It's much more of a brute force, thermodynamic physics, engineering approach, whatever you like to, where it's about controlling the fate of cell states around there by understanding and controlling the cell transcriptomic, the whole transcriptomic network. Think of it like a massive network map that you're identifying the nodes at which you need to intervene with a suitable factor, and by doing that, you will get an energetic flip of state into another cell state. So I first saw this when I was CEO of Horizon. My current director of cell technologies, Rodrigo Santos, was at Horizon with me. Somebody brought this paper to me in January 2016 and said, well, it's reasonably early, goes, but you know, if this really pans out, this could be the future. Because we were struggling in the field of gene editing to find cell types that were relevant to create models that were really accurate for patients. So we were using tissues that had been deposited in cell banks for years. We eventually were using stem cells and IP. Everything was a compromise. What we really wanted was cells that hadn't been edited, hadn't been modified, hadn't been cultured with genetic drift. We wanted a pure, consistent source of cell that we could then do gene editing. So the only variant was the gene editing that we did. So we were really excited when we first saw this paper. And this paper, which has led to the basis of the Mogrify technology, described what I'm going to talk about on the next few slides. So we mentioned the Nobel Prize-winning work of Yamanaka. They identified these 4 transcription factors after years of trial and error. So if you think about some of the Mogrify conversions that we've already done, you may need 8 transcription factors in order to be able to do that. Right? Sometimes it can be even 10. The search space of transcription is nearly 10 to the 21. Yamanaka and Gurdon looked at less than 20 factors over a period of nearly a decade. And they narrowed the search space through their knowledge of developmental biology and their expertise in particular pathways. But experimentally, it was a tortuous approach. And most of the field gave up, which is what often happens. And those that persevere by great skill and a little bit of luck, if you speak to them, they know there's a little bit of luck involved as well. They solved this problem and showed the direction and won the Nobel Prize in 2013. The reason I can tell you it's difficult and not systematic is you're pretty much looking there. There's a few other examples. Over the next decade, they published in 2007, over the next decade, less than a dozen conversions had been done by the entire field in the entire world around there, even using the Yamanaka method around there. So it's not easy. So what Mogrify's approach does is eliminate that trial and error and makes it systematic, and it identifies the conversions that will work up front. And I'll explain to you how we do this. Okay. Like all great science, you know, as good as it is to come up with your idea in a business class and on a piece of paper, and you come up with the idea, it's built on painstaking hard work. So the starting point of this was the founders of Mogrify, Professor Julian Goff, who's now here at the MRC, Professor Aaron Rackham at Duke NUS, and Professor Jose Perlo at Monash University. They were at different universities at the time, Albert Einstein, Bristol, and Riken in Japan. Now, Riken is a great example of a Japanese group that puts together these consortiums called the Phantom Consortium. And the Phantom 5 Consortium, the idea was to get cell types, representative cell types of every tissue in the human body. And they sourced those cell types from around the world. They brought them in, and the technology at the time was called cap analysis of gene expression. So next-gen sequencing was not around at that stage. And what they did was detailed transcriptomic analysis on the same system by the same scientists over a 3-year period of every representative tissue type in the human body. And out of this came effectively a map of cell states. These are the states at which all cells in the body exist in a stable state. And it's a good hypothesis. We're a successful species. We may get genetic drift and get diseases later on. We may have microenvironment changes, epigenetics, behavioral things affect things, but we're generally speaking stable. And so your cells exist in stable states. So I think it's a pretty good hypothesis and a great background data set. We had access to this data 2 years before it was published, and on the back of this, we started to build the Mogrify sort of patented technology. Then you wanted to create context. They're the states. So we then brought in effectively like looking at the crosstalk. If you identify all these factors, how do they crosstalk? How do protein DNA work? How does the protein-protein interactions work? So you're building up a regulatory network beyond those cell states and correlating those cell states to build effectively a cell cycle network. You're then identifying from those two things the combinations of transcription factors or small molecules that will also regulate the same transcription factors, the ability then to be able to convert the cell from one state to the next. So for those of you not scientists in the room, I'm going to explain it in a non-scientific way in the next slide. Okay, so this is what we do. It looks scientific, right? But we're going to do it in a non-scientific way. So this is the sort of process, right? The key here is the representative cellome. This is effectively the background data. The first step of this process is, think of it like all the cities in the world. Every city in the world has a different skyscape around there, buildings of different height, etc. Think of those as the genes that are expressed in a cell state. Each city is a cell around there. What you're trying to do in step one is contextualize that and look at the differences between how New York might look from Cambridge or New York from London. And you're looking at a differential gene expression pattern, and that's the change that you need to effect in order to be able to make New York into London. And so think of it at that simplistic level, if you like. The second thing you need to do is to identify and scoring which buildings, which genes need to change. So you now have a recipe of the things you need to interact with in order to affect that change. You then start looking at those buildings, transcription factors. They then will interact with the protein-protein, DNA-protein interactions, and you then start creating a map, if you like, for the conversion. These are the things we're now going to have to change specifically in order to be able to create the conversion. Then you start scoring the factors. So if we make these changes, we've identified these changes, these are what are going to rank it. We don't just identify one set, we identify all the possible changes that are necessary, and they're ranked down into the hundreds. And so you get a complete sort of picture of the conversions that need to be changed. And then we look at each one in isolation and then in combination, and we come up with a recipe that we can then test in the test tube to create that conversion. The final step is we want to optimize it, because clearly you want to use less factors or molecules, the better. So you're looking for things that have a wide degree of regulatory control, but they have no overlap. So that gives you then 98+% coverage of the expression changes you need to make to affect the change from one city to another, one cell type to another. And that's how Mogrify V1 technology worked. Very quickly, they did a retrospective analysis of all the cell conversions that had ever been done in history, and they either identified the same factors or alternate factors that were subsequently then shown to be able to do the same reprogramming. So that's the sort of classic sort of retrospective analysis of all the historical conversions. And then within a very small period of time, Jose turned his lab over to this project, and bear in mind 12 in 10 years. In 3 months, they did 3 brand new conversions that had never been done before and validated those conversions. Subsequent to that, between 2016 and 2019, 15 additional conversions had been done. They wanted to show the generality, to go from immature cells to mature cells. They wanted to say that you could start from multiple different starting cells and go to the same finishing cell, and then a wide variety of different sort of stages of cell differentiation as well. So that's the sort of validation that happened with the platform. Okay. So that's what we got hold of around there exclusively in the company. Now, our vision to disrupt the field here, we go back to our first slide about vision, is very clear to Julian, to myself, etc., that this had amazing potential beyond our core business. And so we wanted to see what could the future be. If we could continue to add next-gen sequencing data, epigenetic data, start looking at various sort of functional CRISPR-I, CRISPR-A data, etc., starting to come orthogonally at this problem with massive scale multidimensional data sets, could we be in a position to completely understand and control the fate of cells? Because if you could do that, a disease is a state of a cell's misfunction around there. It can be driven by lots of different things, but that's ultimately what it is. Okay, I'm going to finish up in the next 5 minutes. Give me 5 minutes extra. Okay. So we want to deterministically, potentially reverse disease. And that's what really gets me out of bed. And I'd retired, and I was come back to do this because I just couldn't resist doing this, because this is as big picture as I've ever seen in my career. But you have to have a business. That's the vision. What are we actually going to do day to day in the business, the strategy and tactics? We're going to transform cell therapy by systematically discovering these conversions and partnering with pharmaceutical companies and developing therapies. We're developing our own therapies, and then we're partnering with pharmaceutical companies to help them develop their therapies. The research applications, we're not playing. That's an area we could play. Horizon's business was very successful in one of those research tools areas, so we will out-license and partner with others to do that. Let's skip on because we're running out of time. So the model that we've gone for is 3 phases. We're developing our own programs internally, and then we'll partner those programs out at phase 1 and phase 2. We do more partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, and we've already signed a couple of those, and they're focused around their particular challenges, either developing new cell therapies or solving issues like manufacturing within a T-cell therapy. For example, can you make a consistent supply of naive alpha-beta T cells so that we can then do our gene editing and create an immunotherapy? So there, and the deal structures are milestones, royalties, and upfront cash. And then being an entrepreneur, you don't want to waste value, so we're looking at how we might strategically spin out certain areas of the business that are non-core, the tools, the biomanufacturing, and some diseases of aging. This is our progress in this year. Raised roughly a $3.7 million seed, a $16 million A1 round in February and October. That's our building. We've got the middle floor there, 12,000 square foot. Coming back to your, don't be in a crappy little building at the back. Persuade someone to give you a nice building around there. We've hired people I've worked with before many times, highly functional. They're leading the business, and my job is to enable them, growing very fast. I've already talked to you about Mogrify V1. We've already dealt with licensing Mogrify V2 and moving on to Mogrify. We got some good grants, about $2.2 million of grants. We closed our first biopharma deal. A second deal we're hoping to close before Christmas, which will give us some nice cash. So hopefully we'll be able to sort of sign over $1 million of contracts, a couple of $1 million of grant in the first year, plus some milestones and drug royalties. Great people. Brought Jane Osborne, who was at Cambridge Antibody Technology, first 20 employees, brought 40 drugs to clinic, 8 to market. Humira, the biggest selling drug in history. She was a co-inventor on that. A lot of experience. Karen Schmidt, I've worked with many times. Headed up R&D at Millennium in the early days. Exelixis in San Francisco. She was the head of Horizon for 8 years, R&D. And so you bring people in who really know what they're doing, that you can really trust to behave like adults. Backed by some great investors. Aaron Innovation Capital is our lead investor. And that's a fund that was backed, so the scientific partners and founders of that are a lot of the great scientists in Cambridge. Steve Jackson, who built Kudos, Mission, he's got a new one. Greg Winter, Cambridge Antibody Technology, etc. He got head of the Royal Society, Venki Ramakrishnan, whereas I was there, the sort of co-founders of the Aaron Fund, and they're a great investor because they want to stop things like Celexa and CAP happening, backing companies that could actually not just their science change the world, but their businesses change the industry as well. Programs, that's what we're doing. We're focusing in arthritis, we're focusing in ocular, cancer immunotherapy, blood disorders. Just give you an example of the therapies that we're developing. This is the one we got a grant for that we're going into in vivo studies with now. So we're developing an allogeneic therapy, so a therapy that can go to everyone in chondrocyte implantation. So when people have dedifferentiated chondrocytes in their knees, they get cartilage issues. These cells will help regenerate the cartilage around there. A lot of the products that are on the market, they can't be manufactured at any scale, and they're autologous. You have to take the sample out of the patient, put it back into the patient. So there's some weaknesses in that. We think we can add value to that. Continuous innovation. This was the point of this talk. This company won't run out of innovation. It has pipeline agreements with all the academic institutions, and it has a culture of where everyone is aligned to putting their innovations into the company. So there's a lot of different stuff going on. And the Holy Grail, which I'm really excited about, our second lead program is a reprogramming for osteoarthritis. There are no treatments for osteoarthritis other than treatment of symptoms, inflammation, etc. We've also developed a cocktail of small molecules that can be injected without to go into goats in the knee and mice for safety, where you can reprogram the damaged chondrocytes in situ in the joint and have an impact or cure on osteoarthritis. So another one that I'm really excited about, that I know Steve's quite happy at AZ, he's been looking at this type of thing for ages, is how you can turn different fat tissues from unhealthy tissues into healthy tissues and have real impacts on diseases like diabetes and various other things. And that's it, I believe. Yep.
great insights there. I think we have time for questions.
I have two questions. So it's
Nice
No, just maybe let's wait
We
for
know,
the
we
microphone.
know each other.
Yeah, great to see you back supporting the entrepreneurship scene here in Cambridge. My first question is with the pharma industry, where you think IP is very important in protecting your IP, then having the open innovation approach, how can you make sure that you're not driven out of business very quickly?
Yeah, so I think I'm very much in alignment with AZ's view on this. I think one of the challenges of the pharmaceutical industry, having been involved with it since the early days of cell-based assays, moving through genomics, proteomics, to salomics and all the areas where we are now, I think closed innovation has been a major cause of lack of productivity in the industry. You know, everyone's been working historically on the same targets and buying all the same technologies from all the same vendors, which has been great for all the vendors who've made lots of money. We've all got rich selling pharmaceutical companies, but it actually hasn't solved the productivity issue. And companies like AstraZeneca, Genentech, and Novartis, people at the lead of this, are seeing this, and they're increasingly now looking at open innovation models. For Mogrify, right, in order for something to have vision, and this has got to be streamed, isn't it? I want my investors to see this bit, right? I'm at the stage in my career where I would sacrifice a little bit of market cap for impact around there, right? I do believe you will achieve great market cap as well. So from my view here, right, the core business here, you protect the platform. So our platform is not leaving the building. Right? So we're never going to license this platform out. So we will control that platform and stay way ahead of everyone else on that platform. The output of is composition of matter, patents around the therapeutic. Right? It's either, and this is where the cleverness has to come in, because otherwise you could just be teaching people. It may be about a property associated with the cell that isn't actually the natural phenotype. It may be around a manufactured product, a process, etc. around there. They're preferably a cell type that could read onto a lot of different areas. So you create things that aren't just very bespoke about the particular therapeutic effect around there, right? That's the key if you're then going to license a platform cell to everyone, right? The thing I'm really interested in, it's what got me involved, but we're still working out how we might do it, is with a technology like this, if it works really broadly, you could actually really sort of carpet bomb the entire landscape and do all the significant cell conversions, all the primary recipes. You don't just get the primary recipes, you can optimize, you can create lots of different sort of combinations around there. And I would like to get to a point where you could then just publish that with standard terms of access around there. No upfront,
Like Spotify.
no upfronts for clearly for academics, no upfronts for small biotechs, some upfronts for pharma, and then different tiers of recouping of value down there. I would love to be able to do that. That's what the original vision is. I've got to deal with trying to keep that vision with the reality of delivering a business for investors, but that's where I'd like to end up. We're spending a lot of money, as you can imagine, on IP. The budgets for IP in this company are enormous around there compared to most companies I've been involved with, and we want to try and find a way if we can do that.
Well, and my second question was, we heard a lot about your successful startups, and you said, it's easy to bring someone successful up.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about what we can learn from your failed startups?
Yeah,
and
absolutely. I learned most actually from the failures. So the first one, a very small one, which in the back of my PhD, which was done just behind here before this building existed. This was just 2 courses of brick, and Brown's was the former STD clinic of Addenbrooke's, and they still serve up quite a few infections there around that. So, and the Institute of Biotechnology was right behind here, and Professor Chris Lowe was one of the sort of pioneers of entrepreneurship. I was his PhD student. At the end of my postdoc, I set up a small business. I got bored with how scientific equipment looked. It was all like flat panel, greys, etc. So I got a group of engineers together, industrial designers who had a business around there, and some graphic designers. And we built a small business based around product design and innovation, and made just about every mistake you could possibly imagine. We were bringing the scientific expertise to this, so the first thing I learned was it's really hard to sell when you haven't got a company behind you or anything like that. So that was one thing. So we spent £10,000 of seed funding from my landlord, who I was living with. They gave us £10,000 of friends, family, and nutters money, and we wasted half of it on these ridiculous brochures that we had made. Probably the last time I paid for a royalty rights image. I should get that on there as well. I remember being a Twyford down with a lab coat on, with our only product we'd ever made as students. It was a solar power vaccine refrigerator that had been on trials at Mount Kilimanjaro with the WHO. Didn't work anymore. And so we were down by Twyford down, because there's lots of sand, the M3 by taking pictures of this. We put this rubbish brochure together around there, and you opened it up in the middle, and the guy's spinning a globe on his finger. And here's the pièce de résistance. We had no market researcher. We called this company Xanax, because X Factor was in 1995, 96. It was palindromic. We thought, isn't that clever? And all the rest of it. Of course, it's a mental illness drug from Pharmacia and Upjohn around there. And you can just imagine, as people eventually got these brochures, and we were sending them around to everyone, scientific generics, all the consultancy companies around here, and you can see them laughing there. You'd open it up, and you'd be sitting there, you'd imagine the strapline being, you'd have to be mad to use Xanax around there, because this was not a good start. And we had the bat phone, and I could never pick up the phone and speak to people. I was really terrible at it around there, and we're just waiting for people to call, and no one called. So eventually we had to get on a position and get on the phone and start calling. And actually the business turned over in 2 years, 400,000 in the end. The other businesses were quite established businesses. My take on that was 70 grand. And what that got me, a lot of experience on how to do there, got some money. I didn't use it very wisely. I went traveling around the world for a year, paid off some student debts, etc. But at least I got a good time when I came back. So there were a lot of mistakes within there, but the business didn't fail around there. The second one was adaptive profiling in 2001. My career has been very much about how you get drugs. I never understood this reductionist approach to drug discovery, around how you take a question out of context and you ask 6 million compounds a very simple question, when actually the body is the most complex, non-linear, multidimensional molecular questionnaire, and you go through this process of reductionally reducing the number of things, and when you eventually put it in to an animal and then to a human, everything falls over, and the rates were, failure rates are really high. So the first thing was cell-based assays. Second bit, which people don't know about, was adaptive profiling. So this company was a joint venture between Imperial College, University of Glasgow, and Scientific Generics, a consulting firm here. And we were developing 3 platform technologies in one company. Mistake number 1. The first of them was massive. The genome hadn't even been completed being sequenced, and we were going to create the surrogate proteome. There were only 1,200 known protein structures at that time in the bank. People didn't know whether there were 15,000, 150,000. People speculated 1.5 million, 150 million proteins. No one really understood any of this stuff. But Professor Tony Cass, a Mullard Medal winner, he invented the glucose, the ferrocene-mediated glucose sensing that's behind all the sort of glucose. I think his company was sold to Abbott for 890 million, so a really well-regarded sort of scientist around there. He'd come up with these promiscuous binding proteins from the human olfactory system that we could mutate and create effectively binding models to create the binding affinity universe. So you could mutate them using cytoretic mutagenesis, put in a fluorescent marker, and you could array them down onto a chip, and then all the known proteins, kinases, phosphatases, all the things that pharma company had been studying, all the chaperone proteins, excretion proteins in the body, metabolomic proteins, we array those down, and you would train drugs with known properties, good properties, efficacy, safety, manufacturability, etc., and then you would use very complex Bayesian mathematics that then profile blind compounds across that. You see how complicated this is, right? It's really complicated, right? And this was 2001. So that was the first mistake, because we also had a cell chip company, a 96 array single cell chip company where you controlled the electromechanical status of a cell, imaged it, so you could control from receptor internalization to excretion and measuring sort of parameters about the cell. And even better, we added a bioinformatics platform on top of that as well to start analysing all of this stuff. So far too complicated. We did a seed round of around 1.1 million. It was Susan Searle's first investment at Imperial Innovation. Martin Frost is the CEO of Cambridge Medical Robotics now, the latest unicorn in Cambridge. Was the CFO at Scientific Generics, lost him his money too. Still both very good friends. And it was too complicated, was the bottom line. And then the second big mistake, it was about us. At that stage, it was very ego-driven. We had such momentum. Everyone was interested in it because it was great vision, and I sold it pretty well. And we got a 20 million Series A together, right there in 2001, in the early part of 2001. We had Advent lead in, Gilda were the followers, others were going to follow around there. We'd gone through reasonable technical due diligence, right? There was a big gap between the technology and the market was, and people bought in that if we gave us enough money, we might be able to do it, and it was big picture enough around there. What happened in September? The World Trade Centers came down, the macro environment changed. Advent pulled the money from this term sheet and did Infinity Pharmaceuticals, doubled its investment in Infinity Pharmaceuticals in Boston. Didn't work, that company very well either. So, and I'm afraid the consortium fell fell through. And then we were struggling, right? A £2 million term sheet came from another group of investors, and everyone agreed, Imperial, generics, etc., that actually this company needed a lot of money around there, and it was probably not going to be able to raise it to be able to do this. So we decided to voluntarily wind up the company while there was still some money in the bank. The thing I learned about that business, right, while everyone else was ducking and diving away, 12 months later I was still working with Imperial and generics to get their IP back and get it into other vehicles around there. So while everyone else had gone, some of the employees were stealing equipment and all sorts of things right there. I didn't get anything else of that business. But what I learned from that is you learn everything about yourself when times are difficult. So whilst I might be quite as Victor will know, quite aggressive when it comes to business, when it's time to actually show your integrity around there, I almost are a little bit passive, if you like, and I have a great deal of empathy for people who put money into businesses. And so Martin Frost said, a lot of people would be pleased that you failed. This was back in the day when people were pleased that you failed. He goes, but I'm not one of them. First contract I got on my own, 9 months later, £250,000 contract from the same investor I lost money to start my own business, which then led to other things. Susan Searle, a great friend, came on the board at IPO of Horizon, around there, lost her money. You can lose money, but you've got to lose it the right way. Strategy, execution, governance, hopefully never make those same stupid mistakes again. You may have a big vision, but you need to bite off a chunk that you can actually achieve and keep the vision going and maybe earn the opportunity to go for the vision. Don't just go for the vision. That was the equivalent of chasing up to the top of the mountain without thinking. Okay.
Great. We've got one more question. I think we're getting... Wait, look.
Hi, Darrin, very impressive presentation. You're a very inspiring person, and I think probably most of us would agree that the sheer momentum and your own personal charisma, I think, is one of the secrets of probably all the companies that you worked with. My question is that, a lot of these, the pharma industry is moving to precision and personalized therapies, precision medicine, but that requires a lot of data, and especially genomics data. And this genomics data right now, according to the research I've done, and probably you also have done, is 80% of it is for white European people. How do you get the 60, 70% of the people who are not white Europeans, how do you get their data?
It's starting to happen, right? So in my time at Horizon, probably 7-8 years ago now, we started having the first interactions with Beijing Genomics Institute. For example, so if you look at what's been happening there, they make what goes on at the Sanger look like a cottage industry. They've got 4,000 scientists working 8-hour shifts, 3 shifts a day, doing sequencing. So they're doing sequencing on patient samples, across wide, we think of the 100,000 Genome Project, they're looking at doing 50 million plus, right? And the emerging economies, once they play to our weaknesses, Illumina wants to sell more machines. Okay, let's give Illumina more machines until we buy complete genomics. Now we make our own. We don't even give Illumina machines anymore, buy the machines. And they're playing to our weaknesses, and they will do it themselves, I believe. I think how you get access to that data, I'm pretty sure AstraZeneca has facilities in China and things like you said. A lot of the pharma companies are building infrastructure in China and around there, and I'm sure some of that comes from, being able to access that data. But there's a lot of power in that data. I know that Roche was not able to get its NIPT product approved in China and various things like that. So I think the data is going to be generated from the various different sources. How you access the data and what the commercial terms are, I don't know. Because in China, for example, you can't bring Chinese patient samples and things out of the country around there. You're probably better to answer that piece of it, but I don't think getting the data is going to be the challenge. You're getting down to the $100 genome soon, etc. around there. I think, all of these countries, it's a priority. There'll be a lot more national centres and things like that. But how Western pharma companies get access to the data is going to be a challenge.
We can talk about that after.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to have to close, unfortunately. I think we've been, but I think Darren's around for answering any more questions. But I think we should thank him in the usual way. And then
another round of applause. So, limitless horizons and the ability to disrupt our own insurgency. These are the ideas that were presented tonight, and I think these are ideas that I